Okay, so here's a little document that I created that I was going to go over. So if we're going to talk about the genders of the angels, let's first talk about that. Okay, so if you notice, they're kind of gender fluid as represented in art. They are gender fluid. They don't really have genders. They're not male or female. They don't have sex organs. They don't have children. They are not, they're concepts. And so in art, you can see how even Lord Michael, who is a very militant, very aggressive, well, not aggressive, very protecting, is very gender fluid. So let's just, they don't have genders. They're not humans. They don't reproduce. But when we relate to them and their elemental rulerships, the elements themselves have an active and passive quality to them. The active elements, of course, are fire and air. Fire being very active, it expands, it destroys it as it creates. As it's a very active element. So is air. Air knocks down trees and buildings, causes tidal waves, all kinds of things. So depending on your personal experience, you may feel that Michael and Raphael are more masculine and relate to them as dudes, or not. It's up to you. Doesn't really. It's more of a personal choice. Whereas Gabriel, representing water, and Uriel, representing earth, those elements are considered passive. Is the word reflective? When we work with these elements, some are active and some are passive. But passive isn't really meant to be an insult. It's really more reflective. So like there are gestures that are used in ritual. The active gesture, sign of the inner, sign of silence, protector. So they're not male or female. Personally, I kind of relate to them as Raphael and Michael being more masculine and Gabriel and Uriel being more feminine. But that's a completely subjective uh, experience from working with them and experience their energies over time. So the archangels, the last part of the ritual is before me, Raphael, behind me, Gabriel, at my right hand, Michael, at my left hand, Uriel. The four archangels, they are the archangels of the tetramorph, the four-letter name. There are four, so we know there's four elements. Anytime that we see four of something, they're going to relate to each other in the same way the four elements relate to each other. An archangel basically means ruler and messenger. What do they rule? Well, they don't really rule like tell people what to do. They kind of represent divine law. Divine law is really more natural law. The language that's used in a lot of magical things like that, we talk about the intelligence of Mercury. We talk about the rulership of Jupiter. But what we're really talking about is the natural laws that they obey. Like you could say the intelligence of electricity is that it obeys Ohm's law. It's smart enough to obey Ohm's laws and the other laws that we use to predict how electricity works. That's its intelligence. So what the archangels are ruling are the qualities of the elements and making sure that they manifest in particular correct ways. So when you look to the east, what you're looking at is Raphael. At sunrise, Raphael, all of that. When you look to the south, noon, at the heat of the sun, that's Michael. When you look to the west, at the sundown, or the west in general, you're looking at Gabriel. And you look to the north, Uriel. They are concepts of the functioning of the universe. And they're also considered to be separate from the other angels that are much simpler in that they have full personalities. They have free will within their domain, following the plan of creation, and they are very sophisticated. Like, for instance, when we did Air of Air, the angel is Idoigo Arde Zoda. It only knows air of air, intellect. It's not an artist. Can't do art. It's not. It's just outside its purview. But if we talk about the archangels, they can do art. They can do everything. They can do all things. And they have certain things that are specialized for them as they're within their realms of their elements. But they're very complex, very sophisticated beings. They're more like people. So here's some information to start building your ideas for your visualizations about the archangels. So the big four that we talk about the most are Raphael, Michael, Gabriel, and Uriel. Here's a quote from the Book of Enoch. And he said unto me, the first is Michael, the merciful and long-suffering, and the second, who has set over all diseases and the wounds of the world of the children of men, is Raphael. And the third, who has set over these powers, is Gabriel. And the fourth, who has set over the repentance unto the hope of those who inherit eternal life, is named Raphael or Uriel. That name is spelled a couple different ways. And these are the four angels of the Lord of Spirits and the four voices I heard in those days. So these are the, yes.
And I want to point out that appears in the Book of Enoch. Make note of that. Put it on the back shelf like I was describing earlier, because there'll be more information on that will have meaning later.
Right. The Book of Enoch, which is a part of the Apocrypha and was lost. So it's found in Ethiopia.
Oh, Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And that was where that text was.
Yeah.
In the Ethiopian Orthodox Church.
Right. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church had a lot of really interesting texts. So Raphael's name means God has healed.
I've been trying to find a Ethiopian Bible, but the official one on Amazon is maybe it has some complaints.
No, it's not. Okay, we'll go with that. Okay, so Raphael in the east, ruling air, the healer, the surgeon, usually visualized as the colors yellow and violet, a very regal, very royal looking archangel. He's mentioned most in the Book of Tolbit, which is a medieval manuscript. It's quite hysterical. The demon or devil or whoever, Asmodeus, falls in love with a woman and kills all her suitors because he loves her and he doesn't want her to have any boyfriends. So eventually Raphael shows up and sets things right, gets rid of this monster guy, and using a magical fish, and heals the eyes of Tolbit, the suitor, and sets the things right. And that's where most of his mentions come from. So he's patron of travelers, the blind, happy meetings, nurses, physicians, medical workers, and matchmakers because of that. But he's also an artist in mathematics and education, things like that are all airy in nature.
Oh, can you, before you go away from that, can you talk a little bit about the use of European images and how that relates to our visualizing them in the LBRP practice?
I like the Renaissance paintings of the archangels and spiritual mythology and everything. And so when I look for an illustration and when I visualize them, I tend to see them with the classic angelic wings, wearing the togas, silks and things, and that's where I gravitate towards. Of course, they're concepts. They're not really, they don't really have an exact physical form. If you'd rather visualize them as pillars of fire, or out of Ezekiel, bands of eyes and wings and things, that's fine. You can visualize them any way that makes the most sense to you. The point is really to come up with a visualization, and it can mature and change over time, and a feeling, because you're looking for building authentic connection with these forces. So the feeling within your body as you connect, as you vibrate to the east, before me, Raphael, how do you feel? What is the feeling that associates with that? When you think about this sort of professor or doctor helping person who is going to help you travel and make connections and gain education and all the things that Raphael is associated with. Very mercurial figure. The important thing is how you feel about it. But personally, I love these Renaissance era illustrations. If you'd rather visualize them as a bird, okay. What works for you is what works. And if you look in a lot of the books, sometimes they don't really have a description at all, because you're looking to build an authentic connection to the force. And so somebody can hand you an image to imagine, which is fine. That's a good place to start. But over time, you want to develop your own connection, because as you build an authentic connection, it'll be so much more meaningful and so much more powerful, and will help you learn a lot about yourself, really. So that's Raphael.
Okay, hold on. I like to focus on visualizing the pentagrams. And I like to focus on I like to focus on the visualizations that I just described. But when it comes to visualizing the angels, I personally prefer to just let them come to me. Some of them I'm still waiting for, and some of them I would rather feel in my body. I do this with all of this would be called theurgy, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
They call it theurgy when you're working with a deity, or Tantra and the Buddhist practices when you're working with these kind of entities. And so I really like to step away from the traditional and sort of create a what if space, that I want something out, I want something to arise in. I don't want to superimpose an idea on my concept of the angel. So I offer that just as an alternative possibility. Oh, look, I could probably clean this up a little for you guys.
Okay, so that's Raphael. I've been meaning to get a copy of the Book of Tobit. I'm sure that would be very interesting. Okay, so then we have Michael, or Mikael. So Michael is his name, or I see I'm falling into his, because I think of it as fire being active. He is the patron of warriors. He's another one who heals the sick and the suffering. He is really more someone who heals diseases. You think about fire like a fever that would cure an illness in your body. He is, for warriors, for rescue people, firemen, anybody who's in sort of a emergency services type thing, not just the military, but any kind of search and rescue, anything like that. He is their patron, and he's also everybody wants Michael to be the patron protector of their country, of their institution, because he's so famous and he is so well loved by so many people. Now, he often, almost always represented in a militaristic form, wearing armor, with a sword or a spear striking down the devil. And in the mythology, when there was the war in heaven and there was the rebellion, it was Michael who struck down the devil and cast him into hell. So when we see two things represented together all the time, we know that there's a relationship of two, right? So it'd be like a yin yang, masculine, feminine. So, it's a relationship of two. So the devil, or Satan, and this, whatever you want to look at it as, represents God's conscience, the critical aspect of, of the mind, of our experience. Like you think about the book of Job, the devil goes to God and says, that guy Job, he doesn't really love you. He's just pretending to love you. He doesn't really care. You should test him. Which, of course, was a terrible thing to do. It was a terrible idea. And God's like, well, okay, I'll test you. You'll see. So Michael represents that which opposes that critical aspect, that aspect of yourself that criticizes your actions. Oh, I should have done better. I should have done this. I should have done that instead of the other. I didn't pay attention enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not strong enough. All of that. That's what Michael really represents. That confident part of ourselves, that trusting part that can overcome that critical aspect within ourselves. So think about him as the sort of the yin yang aspect, but also a fire of our will that overcomes that critical aspect, conscience, and relate to him in that way. And of course, I picked this because it's a very classical image. My feeling is I don't have any problem projecting outward an image, and as long as I'm receptive to any changes that come back. So if you want to visualize him, or as this being, or if you just want to see what arises, either way is fine. Of course, always the lame advice is try it both ways and see which one you like better, right? I hate hearing that, but it's really true. So yeah, Michael is probably the most famous archangel that there is. There's tons of information and artwork on him. Okay, now here's Gabriel. I really like this image a lot. So Gabriel shows up as the angel of Annunciation. And, since archangels and angels generals are considered messengers, what messengers are is lines of communication between you and the higher self and ultimately the creator. So Gabriel shows up as the angel of the Annunciation when he tells Mary that she's going to have a divine infant, Jesus. But Gabriel shows up in a lot of other places as the communicating angel. It brings the information. And when we invoke her, a lot of times we ask her for the connection to the ecstatic states of being that allow us to open those channels of communication. It's also considered, often shown holding a horn. That's, she's going to announcing something. And a horn is, of course, another yin yang symbol. It has a pointy male and a open female. It's, anything like that is going to imply sort of that sort of duality. So she's considered patron of any kind of communication, job, postal workers, clerks. She's usually shown in blue or white, carrying the trumpet or a lantern or a branch from paradise. So she is in the West and representing the element of water, of the emotional realms and reflection, but also the ecstatic states of being that you need to go through to be able to have this connection to your higher self. And strength of God. So here we have an emotional, ecstatic being who's representing strength. It's something to consider. I really like this picture, with the rainbow wings. That's so awesome. And all the beautiful silks and jewels.
Very opulent.
Yeah.
Very, I wonder where that picture came from.
Oh, I could find it. Showing up, delivering messages.
It does look like one of the more orthodox versions of Christianity, doesn't it?
When they get into painting the angels, They get pretty creative. I think they were allowed a lot of freedom to come up with something as long as it was pretty.
I mean, that's an amazing robe and crown.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of opulence there.
Well, there's a lot of things come out of the sea. A lot of opulence.
Why did they do it red rather than blue?
The elemental colors weren't always so strict, and you were allowed a lot of creativity when you were painting something like an archangel, as long as it looked nice and people enjoyed the picture. It was like a place where they could be freedom. Red is an expensive pigment.
Oh, that's why red was associated with royalty the way it is. It looks like it's...
And purple even more expensive.
Yeah, because it's red and blue.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine getting a good strong red or a good strong purple would be hard using natural dyes.
Yeah, a lot of times the purple came from sea slugs or type of sea creature.
Mm.
But sure, you can visualize her being more, I always do, more blue and silver rising out of the sea, those sorts of things. So now we get to Uriel. I found a pretty fun picture of her, something a little more modern.
Here, I'll do it.
So Uriel being light of God. Uriel is a complex being. And like you said before, sometimes Shanael is used as well, but it's kind of referring to the same being, light of God. She's also supposedly being able the vision of God, God's sight, the light of God. She's responsible, sometimes represented as the zodiac itself, or the sun, or being the force that moves the planets. And she's in the north and associated with Earth. She's also one of the angels, like I mentioned above, that's guarding the Garden of Eden to keep everybody out, because we don't belong there anymore.
Hold on. So she guards the Garden of Eden.
Yes.
Hold on.
No.
I have a question.
I'm looking at something. So part of her patronage is also the arts, confirmation, science, poetry, and judgment. So she has a lot of focus on a lot of very practical matters, very practical angel. What was your question?
I don't remember.
So a lot of times she's shown holding fire, book, scroll, a flaming sword, or the disk of the sun. So those are the 4 archangels that represent sort of the 4 directions, that sort of represent creation divided by 4. Some ideas that you can use to start relating to them to try to build sort of an authentic connection. These elements, the 4 elements come up throughout the practice, and getting that balance within ourselves is really important.
Can you talk about the word AGLA as it relates to Uriel?
AGLA is a notarikon, which is like an acronym for Adonai, Gibor, Olam, Amen, meaning Lord, thou art powerful forever, which comes out of a cycle of Jewish prayer that's done in the evenings, that's a much larger Jewish prayer. So what they do is they take a very large practice that may take hours or days, and they shorten it to 1 sentence, and then they take the first letters of that prayer and make it into a single word. So like the tip of the spear, a point that represents a much larger, more powerful practice. So we have Yehovah, which is, the 4 elements in the east, which represents the Raphael. Adonai, Lord meaning, think about Lord meaning something that's in control, the will in the south. Eheye, which translates as I am that I am, or I will be, as the emotions, and the west. and in the north, AGLA, representing the sort of the foundation, where thou art powerful forever, the foundation of earth, the element of earth, and a much larger practice. Does anybody have any questions about this? Comments?
So we could probably do this, right? All right. Anybody have any questions or comments?
Well, you explained how to relate to Michael in a really great way about, first of all, the inner critic in dialogue, self-talk, and then overcoming it with the fire of the will. Do you have any tips kind of like that for the other three angels?
Well, you have to actually do the practice. You have to do the practice and develop a more authentic connection, because as you go through and you banish earth to the east, you're cleaning up the air element, and then Raphael comes in and you relate to that quality. And then as you go to the south and you banish earth to the south, you're banishing the fiery aspect of earth and cleaning it up, and so Michael can manifest. Right to the west, you banish earth, the water direction, you're cleaning up your emotional life. And then Gabriel can manifest, and you can have that connection as well. Like you go to the north, banish earth, the earthiest part of earth, the heaviest, most cumbersome aspects of the element, clean that up. Uriel can manifest, so a much more practical angel to help get things done. And so you kind of have to do the practice and build this relationship, because it's experiential. It's not so much, you can tell things to a point, but you really have to practice it and experience it for yourself. And over time, that you'll learn yourself by building that sort of authentic connection.
Okay. Thank you. Cool.
I think you're right. I think we're going to just keep on, I think that we actually, it's a very good question, but there's so much in this guided meditation that we just did and will continue to do, so that you should have it pretty well ingrained inside of you. We're going to do it like a kata, we're going to do it like a drill, or a practice, so that everyone can really become ripe with, at very least, the Kabbalistic cross and the LBRP, because those are really the two most important spiritual tools that you'll have in your toolbox. So, and from there, we will continue to build. We're not going to stop there. We are going to work through the different ideas that are in here, because there aren't that many, and I think that we're a lot more ready. And then we'll move on to the green book shortly as well. So, I would say let's just practice. And so that gives you a lot more to do. And maybe it would be good if we just kind of would you guys actually use, if I just had the guided visualization, would you use something like that? And I had a video of it that you could access. Would that make it easier to get a daily practice going? Why don't you vote by chat or something? I don't know why it's like that. Okay. So somebody who's a beginner would relate to that. So everybody else can do all the visualizations on their own without assistance from an outside source.
I pretty much think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, can.
We assume that from you. We're waiting for the other two people. Who's petite? Who's petite?
Sebastian.
Like, that's a good one. That's a good one, Spat. That's
Yeah, I
a
like
good
that.
one.
Mm-hmm.
Petite Changa. That's a very good one. That's why I went to Tara. I made myself a more petite version. Yeah. Okay.
Well, people are thinking, can I make a small comment to you
Yeah.
Please.
on the Archangels? You were looking at the Renaissance, beautiful Renaissance artwork. Keep in mind that there are two factors going on here. One is that there was Hebraic caveat against having any images of them. So in medieval Christianity, it immediately became almost a necessity and an act of faith to make wonderful pictures of them to show that you're no longer Jewish, you're now Christian.
Ah.
This was especially true in the medieval Catholic Church. So these changes in the looks, of course, follow immediately the either Gothic or Renaissance views of art and beauty that these creatures that they are trying to embody would have within their society. So yes, you're not seeing so much the pure archetypical colors that go with the archangels and the elements as you are seeing the wonderful flowering of how we can most beautifully represent these entities, which is why there's so much variation,
Yes.
especially from country to country and small cultural group to small cultural group. Does that help at all?
Definitely.
Definitely, absolutely does. Yeah, I
And
think
another thing I'd like to bring up just in passing, but people are talking about the Christianity of some of these things, especially the Kabbalistic cross and the LBRP, and the somewhat irritation to the psyche that this has. I was brought up Roman Catholic. And one of the things about Roman Catholicism in my day and age, which was a few years back, the phrase, the kingdom, the power, and the glory do not appear in the Lord's Prayer. These were added to the Lord's Prayer during the Reformation. Where I came from and where I was brought up, that was already heretical and not to be done. So that particular hound doesn't hunt for me. He already wasn't there. Christianity is a big place. The formularies changed dramatically and it has evolved over time. And some of us are in a whole different time. I'm pre-Vatican II. So seeing all these things pop up, I really have to put them into a different kind of framework. I don't know what anybody else will have to say about it, but hey, that's cool.
you bring up a good point too, that when you start to study the mythology and everything of the archangels, and we are, I think, conditioned to find a very well organized, very easy to follow, sort of like we talk about canon and like Star Wars and stuff like that. Like this is what it's supposed to be. Everything else is not part of it. And these sorts of ideas have been around for so long, and so many people have interacted with them and come up with their own experiences, that we can find that there are other colors, other directions, and other ideas associated with a lot of these beings, and that can be confusing. We're going to provide sort of a set of attributions to use, but these are very popular sorts of beings that have been going through different cultures and have had different artists have been inspired to show them differently. Some people only see them as balls of light, whereas I'd like to see them as these floating in the air with these big silken robes that are blowing in the wind, but that's my experience, is that, we're allowed to have our own unique personal experiences of all these forces, because ultimately that helps us to learn about ourselves. But yeah, it's a very vast tradition.
I just wanted to say I've been to Vienna twice, once that I can remember, and I've seen the jewelry of the Austro-Hungarian Habsburg, I suppose, stuff, and it is that opulent, and it's there, and they must have had a lot of access to luxury, precious materials, and also craftsmen that were capable of making all that stuff. It's pretty cool. It's very nice. Very good jewelry. Very impressive. It's there. I saw the crown and everything. That like for example, that the angels are adorned with in
Right.
some of their depictions.
Right. So do we have any more questions?
Yeah, I'm going to stop the recording